I have so much gratitude. I learned so much from the experience and from him and the grace with which he faced death and the treatment. And I learned so much from my kids and their resilience and their ability to face it. I wouldn't trade it.
Hi, this is Patrick.
And this is Laura.
And you're listening to This is Cancer.
Brought to you by Siteman Cancer Center at Barnes Jewish Hospital and Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. National leaders in cancer. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of This is Cancer. And I want to warn you from the beginning that this one might go a little long because we were already having conversation deeply about this subject of caregiving before we even hit record.
Yeah, I had to scold everybody to stop talking. Save it for the episode.
Yes. We're all, we have all been or worked with caregivers. And so we think that, we hope that a lot of you that are listening are caregivers and might feel some validation in the way that you're feeling about whatever you're going through. So I want to say welcome back to This is Cancer. Jennifer, go ahead and tell us what you do at Siteman Cancer Center.
Well, thank you for having me back. I'm excited to be here. I think this is a really important topic. I'm Dr. Jenny Romo. I'm a clinical psychologist at Siteman Psychology Service, and I provide psychotherapy to patients going through treatment for cancer, as well as their family members, caregivers. I facilitate our Caring for the Caregiver psychotherapy group, and I'm excited to be here and talk about what the caregiving experience is like.
And then we're joined by Courtney Beers, who's also an employee at Siteman, but more importantly, also a long history of being a caregiver.
Yes, thanks so much for having me here.
Thanks for being here.
I really appreciate the opportunity to represent Siteman and also talk about my experience.
And let's start a little bit about your experience with caregiving and which was a long journey for you.
Yes.
And tell us just kind of the cliff notes of what you went through for 18 years?
Yes. So I married my high school sweetheart. I was 23 and he was 24 at the time. And within 1 year of getting married, he had a seizure that we found was caused by oligodendroglioma, so a brain tumor in his left frontal lobe. He had surgery at the time, radiation, and then went a few more years before needing surgery again. So over the course of his 18 years, he had 3 surgeries, 2 rounds of radiation, and probably cumulative 7 years of chemo.
Wow.
So yes, so he went through a lot. He lived a lot longer than we ever imagined, and I attribute that to Siteman. So we had amazing physicians and caregivers at Siteman.
Jenny, when you walked in, you said an alarming statistic to me that would represent how many, just Americans, by the way, not globally, are caregiving to someone in their life.
Yeah, nearly 53 million Americans identify as caregivers. And the way we define caregiving is anyone providing care to a family member, relative, or friend who's over the age of 18 within the past 12 months. And so you can imagine, just how many people are going through this. They're often, they're unpaid, they're untrained, and often unrecognized in the healthcare, like the structural system of healthcare. So it's, and when you factor in the economic, I'll say, cost or the value of that care, I think the statistic is even more staggering. It comes out to over $600 billion annually.
Wow.
In when you kind of total the labor that these caregivers are providing.
Wow.
So it is a lot.
We always use this analogy, like if you broke your collarbone or broke a leg, like someone can empathize and be like, that must really hurt. Or
right.
you have, you had your hip replaced, but people can't see the hurt and the worry and the fear and the stuff going on in your mind as a caregiver, because it's just, you just got to put on your, pull up your big girl pants and just say, no, it's going to be fine. No, it's just what we got to do. We just got to push through, and it's just, and you feel like you got to be positive, because then people start worrying about you, and then you don't want people to worry about you, because then you worry about managing your emotions in front of them so that they don't worry about you.
Exactly.
And these are all the things that we work on with our caregivers, because you get to be human, right? And you can only do what you can do. And there are going to be moments where that is the next step, or that feels like it's the most helpful or authentic in the moment. And then there are going to be those moments where, you know, you say, I've had it, I'm at my limit, and I'm going to, you know, ask for help. The mental load is enormous.
You got to tag out.
You got to tag out.
Yeah, knowing your limits, I think, is tricky.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest things that you hear, Jenny, when caregivers, when they first come to you and they're like, do they just like, blah, 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 blah?
You know, it varies, but I would say, you know, burnout is real. And people often, you know, feel like they're going through this situation in a way where others don't always fully understand, that kind of going back to that feeling of isolation or invisibility. And so kind of talking about the emotional burden, the physical burden, right? There's often just this physical exhaustion and depletion that goes along with caregiving. Often people are working their full-time jobs.
Yep.
You know, doing things that are manually, like physically taxing. And then also the financial burden, right? I think on average, caregivers are, I think the figure is somewhere around like $7,000 a year out of pocket, not related to medical costs, and that's the average, right? Which, when you think about it, like who has an extra $500-$600 a month just laying around to, you know? So there are often people are coming saying, I'm maxed out, I'm overwhelmed. There are these emotional, physical, financial areas, and I need help, you know, kind of processing it, putting together a game plan. And so a lot of what we do, yes, psychotherapy involves things like helping people learn new coping strategies, processing difficult emotions, learning communication strategies. But also we do a lot of psychoeducation and, you know, helping get people connected to different resources that are going to reduce the load. People don't plan for cancer. Often they come in and they're like, this is so new to me. What do I need to do here?
It's a tornado. It really is. And I'm curious, Courtney, like was it 18 years that your husband was dealing with cancer? How often out of those 18 years, how much of those 18 years did you feel like you were just in the trenches? I mean, it sounds like early on it was like, hey, we got some good years here.
Yes. That
That was scary. You know, like with my dad, my main experience that I reference all the time on the show, he fought for, you know, he endured it for over 5 years. It was, for me, a gradual ascent, and I kind of was getting more and more calloused or you know, like battle hardened or better at it.
Right.
So I'm curious, because when I hear 18 years, I'm like, wow.
I know. I was
that
exhausted.
is, like, how did you get through that?
I think those are really great points. I think, and that's one of the things that I wanted to say today is that don't look too far ahead, because it can be overwhelming and daunting, because really it's just take it a step at a time. And that's what we did. So I'd say the first 5 years, it was always in the back of our mind, but really after that, it was, you know, I don't know if he's going to make it to Christmas. I don't know if he's going to make it to our girls' graduation, things like that. So it was very much on the forefront. I mean, so much so that when he stopped treatment, I mean, fortunately, we all have a sense of humor about this, and he did too, thank goodness. But when he stopped treatment, I said, do you think you should let people know? Because people came along with us on this journey from day one. And he said, what am I going to put on Facebook? Charlie's dying again. Right. Yeah.
I love the dark humor that comes
I
with
do.
it. You
So
have
real.
to embrace it.
Oh, humor saved us.
That's hilarious.
Humor saved us, but it definitely felt like we didn't know how long he would make it. But I'd say I agree with you. The last 6 months, definitely, and then that hospice period.
It's all consuming.
Right. But the little changes over time, like him not being able to, the word finding, not being able to walk, using a cane to using a wheelchair, those things you get used to over time. So try not to, I would say to caregivers, try not to look too far ahead. Mm-hmm. You'll ease into it.
Do you remember times where you would be really, really like scared about something? There was something that was going on and you were sharing about that, and then like a week later it would get better.
Yes.
And you'd want to just enjoy that time, but then people were like, well, what happened with this? And you're like, oh, well, it got better.
Right.
And now I'm recovering, so I don't want to retell what just happened.
Exactly.
Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And I think that also aligns with people who may not have the same approach to your situation, meaning people who want to talk about how horrible it is or how hard it is. Sometimes that's not what you need.
Right.
The next day it might be what you need. But I think, sometimes you just want to move on, or you need to move on, and you can't get stuck in the details of what you were doing last week when the ambulance came and you were in the hospital. You just need to move on.
There should be like a deck of cards, like tarot cards for there's like all these archetypes as you're going through this, and they all play a role. There's like the commiserator.
Exactly.
The one that wants to, oh my God, when my brother was going through it, oh, isn't it the worst? And then there's like the distractor who's like, we're not even here to talk about that. Did you see the game last night?
Exactly.
Then there's like the person that'll come in with a bunch of positivity that
right.
Sometimes you need them and other days they might just make you sick. They're so positive.
Yeah.
There's just all these different characters that it's just funny how sometimes they come at the right time and sometimes they come at the worst time.
So true.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things we do in our Caring for the Caregiver group is I'll ask the people who show up to kind of look inward and think about what they need out of group that day. And it's precisely to practice this so that when you are out living your life, you can kind of have, some practice turning inward and saying do I need the cheerleader right now? Do I need someone to, commiserate with me? Do I, who is going to help me scratch that itch? Because sometimes it is just knowing what you need in that moment. It changes so fast.
Yeah, it changes daily.
You're so focused on what they need that often caregivers are not thinking about what I need, right, in the moment. And so it does require some practice to kind of take your pulse on where you are emotionally to kind of get to the next step of whatever that next step looks like.
You mentioned, caregivers knowing what it is that they need. How often do you hear people complain about you need to take care of yourself as well?
Yeah.
Don't do that patronizing voice when you say that.
No, if you're not okay, they won't be okay.
Yeah.
So there's another pressure point on you.
Oh, absolutely. I think self-care is a buzzword in lots of circles. And it can almost, I think, for caregivers feel like a criticism when people ask about it. I know it sounds strange because often we hear about self-care and it comes from this, kind, caring place, but it can feel like another thing to put on your to-do list. And
like take a shower.
Yeah,
okay.
Right.
Get a little right. Maybe worry about yourself for a minute.
Right. Or oh wait, I'm not doing a good enough job of taking care of myself.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not doing a good enough job of taking care of my loved one. And often there is this metaphor that comes up. I hear, caregivers say this, that someone has said, oh, well, you have to put your oxygen mask on first before you, help, like on the airplane, help someone else. And I think, again, it can feel just so overwhelming to even know what you need to do to take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we work on with caregivers, I kind of like to use the metaphor of treading water in the ocean. There are times where you need to just lay on your back and float. And so finding small ways to do that, right? Like a minute, 5 minutes, where can you sprinkle that in? Oftentimes we're trying to be very creative about that. It's tailored to what someone's life actually looks like. And so usually I use that image with people of how can we help you float for 5 minutes today? Mm-hmm. Where can we build that in? So it might look like going on a walk. It might not look like that. It might look like, practicing some deep breathing that we work on in a psychotherapy session or some guided visualization. It might look like playing with your dog or your kids, but figuring out ways to sprinkle those things in a way that can feel more accessible rather than I don't have time to go get a massage. I don't have time to get a haircut. I don't have time to go to the bathroom, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if, Courtney, you experienced difficulty when people would say, take care of yourself. But
absolutely. I think I experienced difficulty knowing what I needed. Mm-hmm. But that's one thing that I definitely, when I talk with caregivers now, as somebody who's been through it, I feel like try not to lose yourself and try to love yourself, be gentle with yourself, and give yourself what you need, even when it means deprioritizing the person with cancer. Sometimes that's really hard.
Yeah, I just went like this.
I know, I could see it in your face. But I remember there was a time when I was having trouble sleeping because Charlie was restless. And so then I moved to sleep into the other room for a few days, and it hurt his feelings. But I needed a good night's sleep or else the ship wouldn't run.
Yeah.
So things like that, just take care of yourselves in that small way. I definitely would feel like, I wish I had time for a massage, but really I'd just be happy to get a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
But how did you get through the guilt of, well, I have all these other people still depending on me, my 2 girls, my job, my friends. If you're taking time out for yourself after you've just been caregiving all day, then you feel selfish because you're using any free time you have to help pour into yourself, but not the other people that still need you and love you. Did it ever feel like you were being selfish?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I definitely fell to the bottom of the list, which was part of the problem. But I had a friend that I would go on walks with, and that helped. I would read. That's kind of restorative for me, and meditate. That helped as well. But it definitely did feel selfish when there was so much going on. But I remember there's a concrete moment in my mind that I remember when everything had been about Charlie, not because he wanted it that way, but just because it had to be, especially when we were really pushing to live life to the fullest and get the most out. So everything had been about him. And I remember this moment where I realized I have to shift that focus back to the survivors, and that would be me and the girls. And how do I start to build a life that will make for a very smooth transition for them and for me? And then I started to have to make decisions along those lines, like what was best for them versus what Charlie wanted.
That's tough too.
I mean,
that just the shift in strategy,
Totally.
To put it bluntly, is got to be in itself a harrowing, and I don't know. It feels like very sad to have to be like, okay, well, we know where this is going to go, so like I can't put all my fuel in that tank. Like I still have to be here.
Right.
To make sure that we can keep going after this happens. Like, and that shift right there, the switching of the tracks.
I think that's why
tough.
it's so concrete in my mind, because it was so difficult. And it was especially difficult when it came to things like, of course, he wanted to be with our girls as much as possible, but there came a point where it wasn't safe for them to be with him by themselves.
Yeah.
And so I had to be the one to make that call, but that was what was best for them.
Yeah.
Versus what he wanted. So challenging,
Did
so
he
hard.
fight that? Did you guys or did he say, I understand?
I'm sure that he said, he was this very easygoing guy, and I'm sure he said he understood, but inside I'm sure it was difficult. I mean, there were other pushes and pulls in that same sense. Like I was trying to create a life for us that was sustainable. So, he would get up in the morning and want to be with them and make breakfast for them. And then I was kind of pushing against that, like, I'm not going to be able to make breakfast for him.
Yeah.
So we had to do a lot of compromising in that regard. I didn't want to take that opportunity away from him, but I also didn't want to set myself up for failure. We did a great job talking about death and dying with our kids, thanks to Annie's Hope, and also with Charlie. But not the little things, the more impactful things for him, I wish we would have talked about in advance. So that's something I would definitely encourage people to do.
Absolutely. We, at Siteman Psychology Service, we encourage caregivers, we encourage the patients with cancer that we work with to think about these things, have these conversations, often repeated conversations, wishes, desires for goals of care, preferences related to their care, quality of life. These are not static things. They can change over the course of treatment. And unless, you're willing to kind of have that conversation and really take that deep dive with someone you don't know, you can't read your loved one's mind necessarily. And that's, again, something that we can help patients and their family members do. Family dynamics are there from before cancer, right? So that doesn't change. Right. And sometimes...
don't tell me to stop working. I raised you.
Yeah, right?
Oh, Lord.
So it's complicated, and it doesn't make the conversation less important. And obviously, timing matters. Whether someone's ready or not ready to kind of delve into those topics, all of that matters. And we can kind of help people navigate that and provide a roadmap to have a little bit more clarity so you don't feel blindsided when these things come up.
I definitely support that. So we were very open with our girls, and we would have a family meeting. We rotated who was president and who was secretary, and the notes are hilarious at this point.
That.
But so we would talk about things like chores and dishes and things like that, but we would always slip in something like, are you comfortable with the way things are going? This is the treatment that Dad's getting, or this is the time when Dad's decided not to have treatment. So we would include that in the family meeting, and I think that was beneficial.
How do you help people, caregivers, if they come to you and say, I've done all this, we've worked this hard, we've gone and done all these treatments, and they don't agree with what the loved one has decided to do with their treatment plan?
It's tricky. And I would say that there isn't a kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to that. Often, there are complicated feelings that come up, and they're all valid. But often that might look like a caregiver processing feelings of grief and loss. There might be anger, resentment. And, a lot of what we do a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot of acceptance-based therapy. There are circumstances that are within your control, and there are circumstances that are not within your control, and kind of helping people figure out how to accept what's not in their control and tolerate all of the uncomfortable feelings that come up with that. It can often be liberating. When we think about acceptance, often people think like, well, I don't want to accept this. That it can feel like giving up, or it can
Doesn't
feel
have to
like
be this way.
Right. But often what we find is that when we can kind of stop fighting the tough circumstances, we can then ask ourselves, how do I want to show up? What choice can I make about who I can be? What version of myself do I want to bring to this difficult, unfathomably challenging situation? And usually that leads to, identifying some of your values, and then making some concrete choices about how to tolerate, what challenges to come. Often people will say, but I can't. And it's like, you can. You're doing it,
Does any of that resonate with you, Courtney?
Absolutely. Yeah. I was just shaking my head vigorously. Yes, definitely. I think the main thing, to your point, is give yourself a break. As a caregiver, you are absolutely allowed to be frustrated and irritated and resentful, and also have this feeling like, I don't know if I can do this any longer. Those are real and valid. Yeah, definitely. And kind of to a point you made earlier about those familial dynamics exist, those relationship dynamics exist. In my case, we still drove each other crazy. Just because he has cancer doesn't mean we don't get on our nerves, right?
You're a married couple. That happens.
I remember one time I said to my daughter, your dad is driving me crazy. I feel like I could just smack him. And she said, you can't smack someone with cancer. And I think
beg to differ.
I think that's the social, that's the message you get from the outside world. But just give yourself a break. You are absolutely allowed to be frustrated.
Speaking of frustration and caregiving, I'm curious, and especially with the family dynamics that exist before cancer, how do you handle helping somebody through problems where like maybe the main caregiver is having feelings of resentment because other people aren't caregiving within the family? Hey, there's 6 of us here. Why am I the one that's being tasked with this?
And if I stop, I don't trust anyone else to pick it up.
Right.
Yeah. It's complicated. It's tricky. I think the fear that many people have is exactly what you're mentioning. Like, if I don't do it, it's not going to be done correct, or it's not going to be done at all. And so kind of helping people tease through the what ifs, like, what if I set this boundary? What if I make this request and it doesn't happen? We'll think through, what are the possible outcomes? What feasibly can you do? And that kind of goes back to the uncertainty bit of like, living with the uncertainty around or grieving the loss of what you have to give up. When you do set a boundary, or you do say that you're at your limit, again, and every family is different.
Yeah, I remember coming up with this sort of analogy in my head, or metaphor, of, if you jump into a pool of cold water, it's freezing. But if you slowly walk your way down the steps and you take your time, you acclimate to it. And that's how I felt every time we would get to another stage where Charlie couldn't walk or he couldn't talk. It would just be one more step, and I would get used to it, and then I would be able to handle the next step.
It's a really good analogy.
Yeah.
But
mine was like a series of ice bucket challenges. But, to each their own.
That's right. That's right. Well, I hate cold water, okay? No, how do you, when you were talking about the caregiver and putting all that power in themselves, how many times do you hear, but if I don't do it tomorrow and we don't get in, then this domino effect is going to happen. And then we're going to be 7. I mean, because a caregiver can really like
spin
and explain every reason why they have to go do that.
And this is a trap that with anxiety, it's very common, right? The worry trap, where we're spinning, we're going over all of the terrible. We've created a scenario that like has played out 1,000 different ways, and so, learning how to kind of stop the spin, looking at the thoughts that are helpful versus not helpful, figuring out, wait a second, am I fortune telling here? Am I like, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't. And sometimes when we're really revved up, when we're anxious, it can be really easy to slip into that like belief that we can tell the future.
Everyone does
we
hate
can't,
me.
Right? So, and that's something that cognitive behavioral therapy is really great for, of kind of helping us catch ourselves when we fall into that unhelpful thinking pattern, and kind of taking a step back and saying like, wait a second, like what is the evidence for this?
Right.
And what is a more helpful thought?
It's like you said, just spinning out. Like when are you fueling bad thoughts? Like go ahead and be proactive, but at a certain point, you're probably just burning fuel that you need for tomorrow.
Yes.
But Courtney, you said you learned to just take on the next
step. Yeah. And I think that I was able to kind of cut that off. There was a turning point when it was clear that Charlie was going to die. I mean, it was always in the back of my mind, but it was clear he will be dying in the next few years. And I am telling you, those were the best years of our life and our marriage together because I let go of expectations. I probably released some pressure on myself, and we just were to spend time together. It was different. So accepting, I think, is part of it.
I would imagine there are a lot of caregivers that are listening to this that haven't really ever talked to Buddy about their problems. They're not like listen, I'm not going to be out there putting my problems on somebody else.
I'm not going to go on some podcast and talk about it.
Yeah. But I would imagine that there are people that come to the caregivers group that maybe even if they don't talk a lot, sitting there and hearing other people validate what they have thought and felt and not feel like they're the only one going through those emotions is literally gold.
Yeah. Yeah. I see it all the time. And usually those people at some point do start to open up about their own experiences, but 100% just knowing, hearing someone, speak and saying, oh my gosh, like this could be my story. This is my story. Mm-hmm. There's something incredibly healing about just knowing that you're not alone. It's powerful.
It's powerful.
That is kind of the whole purpose of the podcast, especially this episode for caregivers, is that, if you're in a group and you don't want to talk, but you get something out of listening to somebody else's story, hopefully they'll get the same thing from listening to Courtney's story and from your input. And we've talked about a lot of things that caregivers go through. I mean, it is hard work. It's a difficult time, some of the hardest times of your life. But I also want people to know, listening to this, it's not all bad. I mean, I will say, being a caregiver, I told my siblings and my friends and family, like, I think taking care of our dad and having him be at home through hospice and being the caregivers was like the greatest gift we could have given him. Now, and I don't mean if you can't do that, then you're checking up short or whatever. I'm thankful that we had the means and the time and the ability to go, you know what, we don't need him to go somewhere. He's going to stay right here, and we're going to handle all this stuff. And we did get time to talk about stuff, not as much as we liked, and we may not have stuck the landing as I said earlier, as many times or as pretty as we would have liked. But as hard as the work was, it was exponentially gratifying. And, it was a lot of effort, but it paid off. It was worth it. I'm just so thankful that we could do that for our dad. I'm sure, you have the same feeling about Charlie, but I'm curious.
Absolutely. I have so much gratitude. I learned so much from the experience and from him and the grace with which he faced death and the treatment. And I learned so much from my kids and their resilience and their ability to face it. I wouldn't trade it.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. I wouldn't trade it.
Did you feel like when it was at the end that you got, I don't know, some people be like, does anyone know what I just did? Did you feel like you needed some accolades, or were you just at that point grieving and none of that mattered?
Well, I was thinking earlier when we were talking about how much work the caregiver does, I was thinking people would come up to me and say, oh, Charlie looks great. And I would think like, yeah, and I am totally wiped out.
Yeah.
And what I think I realized after he died is that everybody realized that all along, that he was able to be as healthy as he was and as engaged in life as he was because he had supporters behind him.
Yeah.
And they may not have mentioned it at the time, but I definitely felt it.
Yeah.
And I felt gratitude from him too. And I feel his presence still. And I feel that gratitude now more than ever.
Why do you think that is?
I think I'm open to it. So before Charlie died, we talked about how would we feel him around us and still in our lives as we moved on. One of the things we talked about was specifically, can you give us a sign that you're with us? And so it took us a while, but we figured out that the sign was going to be a feather. And so anytime my daughters or I see a feather just on the ground, we feel like that is an indication that he's there with us, loving us and holding us. And now it's expanded. So I think friends and family now feel the same way. So it's an indication that he's there. And I think that's an indication of his gratitude.
That's really sweet.
I love that it's a feather too, because when you said that, I immediately thought of something like light and not heavy.
Yeah, exactly.
And being a caregiver feels the exact opposite.
So true.
It feels weighing you down, and a feather is just like, I don't know, like releasing all of the stress of that whole experience and just feeling
free,
light and free.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing, is just to say, it's okay to feel a sense of relief.
Yeah.
When the person is gone.
Yeah. As we close out this episode, I wonder if we just kind of go around and give one piece of advice to our audience, the caregivers out there, the people that are going through it, that might find themselves going through it at some point, because cancer touches everybody. I mean, we've discussed a lot of pieces of advice, but for me personally, I think the one thing that I would want somebody to know as a caregiver is that you're not alone. It certainly is an isolating thing to be doing, but you have to find a way to you have to find an outlet, whether it's taking time for yourself or taking a friend up on one of those offers. You have to do something. It's beyond any one person to shoulder it, and you have to find a way to let some relief in.
That's great advice. I would say along those lines that you will be feeling this sort of blender full of emotions, everything ranging from the gratitude that we talked about to the resentment and the guilt. And please don't shame or judge yourself for any of those feelings. Just be gentle with yourself.
Yeah.
I would say you matter. And often in this, experience, the caregivers we talked about go unrecognized. There's no pay, there's no formal training. And my hope for all the caregivers listening is to just take this in. You matter. We have resources. We're a phone call away. You matter. So take time for yourself. Go inside, think about what you need, and hopefully we can support you.
And I think I would say you cannot make everything perfect. You cannot make sure that there's no suffering. You can't make sure every meal they eat in the hospital or the nurse they're going to have is good, because life isn't perfect, and neither is cancer, and neither is the journey, and it sucks. Mm-hmm. It sucks, and you can't make it all unsuck. You just can do the best that you're able to do when you're able to do it. And don't put the whole world on your own shoulders, because you're not that powerful.
Can I say one thing?
Please.
One thing that I've learned from this experience as a caregiver is to be very aware of the people that surround the patients. So I see you. I see you as the person that makes all of this possible. And so I'm very grateful to have that different perspective, just to see all that it takes to get the person to the appointments and to feed them and things like that.
So you're saying for people that are listening, if you know someone that's a caregiver, see them as much as you see the patient.
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
Much
because they're in it in the trenches right beside them.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming on to talk about this. It's really important. I know to the listener, it may seem kind of doom and gloom. It is, as we said, it's hard work, but it's really gratifying work. And so I just think, the main takeaway I want anybody to get from listening or watching this episode is there are resources out there, and you just have to take that first step, because what you're going through is hard enough, but it doesn't have to be that hard. And you certainly don't have to go through it alone.
Yeah. And Courtney, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story and your advice and your journey. It was a long one for sure, and I'm sure you're going to help a lot of people from coming here today.
Thank you.
And Dr. Romo, thank you for your always soft, kind, calming voice. You always validate and say that's normal. And it helps. It helps to just hear it and have you mean it and be like, okay, that's normal. So thank you.
It's a mini therapy session that we get out of it as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Would you mind closing us out with some pertinent info on what Siteman patients could do if they're going through this, where to reach out?
Absolutely. So if you are a patient with cancer, or you have a loved one who is going through treatment for cancer, or even if they've finished their treatment for cancer, our psychology service is free of charge. We offer 8 to 10 visits of individual psychotherapy. We also offer a variety of groups, including the Caring for the Caregiver group. We'll have information on the number you can call to contact us, but you can also reach out to your loved one's treatment team. They can enter a referral or get you connected with our service easily.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to This is Cancer.
Brought to you by Siteman Cancer Center at Barnes Jewish Hospital and Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis.
National leaders in cancer.
For more information on Siteman Cancer Center, go to siteman.wustl.edu and be sure to leave us a review and like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.